Howdy folks, today we're going to be talking about exiting members for employment through our Youth Build AmeriCorps initiative. So we're going to be talking about a new initiative that we're excited about, which is the option to exit members for employment for a partial education award. So we're going to talk about how you can participate in that process and what the requirements are in terms of documentation. And then we'll also be reviewing exits for personal and compelling circumstances. It's another way that members can earn partial education awards. It's been part of our network for a while, but I thought it would be helpful to review to make sure that everyone is aware of what those requirements are, especially if we've talked about the other partial ed award option through employment. So just to give a brief overview, there's some nice legalese right there. This is actually from the original law that allowed for AmeriCorps to be created. So I just wanted to give some background on why we're able to do this. So the CNCS has designated that there are certain circumstances under which a member can be exited from AmeriCorps and still earn a partial award. And in this case, it's a public policy reason, which is that CNCS wants programs who have employment as part of their performance measures for their members to be able to exit those members without penalty. So that's why we're able to do this and allow this as an option. So in the past, employment was not a performance measure for us, but it has become one in recent years, and so that gives us the option to allow for this. So what are we actually trying to achieve with this initiative? So the goal is really for members who have secured employment as part of their service to earn a prorated education award based on the hours that they completed. So for example, if you have a member who completed 75% of their hours, they would earn 75% of the value of their education award for their slot type. So the goal here is really to avoid punishing members who have done really everything that they should be doing at the program, have really had a successful experience, but they have a great job opportunity that comes up. They need to leave the program before earning all of their awards, but really they did succeed as a Youth Build AmeriCorps member, and so we want to make sure that we get that member an award. And it's also going to be a strategy for us in terms of improving education award attainment. So that's what we're trying to achieve. What we don't want to have, what it's not, is it's not a full education award. So it's really based on the hours that they earned up to date, so they won't get the full sense. And I guess I just want to make it clear that our goal is still for every member to earn a full education award. So whenever possible, you do want your member to be able to earn enough hours to get that full award. So there may be circumstances where this would apply, but really we want to make sure that the goal is always that full education award. The other piece we want to make sure that it's not is a dilution of the service experience. So we don't want this to be a method for reducing member hours or creating a program design that's kind of getting members in the door and out the door, and then using this as a way to exit members with an award without really getting the full Youth Build AmeriCorps experience. So we don't want that to be an outcome of this. And then lastly, we also don't want it to be a way to inflate education award attainment. So yes, we want to improve education award attainment. We want to improve how many members are earning an award. But really the goal behind this is rewarding successful participants. And so maybe there might be a circumstance, and we'll go over in a second what the qualifications are, where a member might qualify for this, but maybe it wouldn't be the best situation to give them an award if they weren't really successful within your program. So just an overview of the things I was talking about there. So who qualifies for earning these partial awards? So we are starting this with the 15-16 grant year, so it's going to be focused on Youth Build members. And by Youth Build members, I'm really talking about your program participants. So your 16 to 24-year-olds who are there to earn a GED, high school diploma, and receive job training while they're doing service to the community. Those are really the population that we're targeting with this. And we are going to be starting with the 15-16 grant year, so only those members would be eligible. We also made it a requirement that the members need to have completed at least 50% of their AmeriCorps hours. So they need to have finished at least half of their service term before they can be exited with an award. They also need to have a satisfactory exit evaluation. Again, this notion that we want this really to be for successful participants. So you need to be able to evaluate the member as they exit and be able to indicate that they were a successful participant in your program. And then lastly, this is from CNCS, is that the employment has to be within 30 days of the exit from their service. So, I mean, I would say almost every time this is going to be applied for members who are going directly from service to employment. But I did want to make you aware that there is a 30-day window here. So if a member secures employment, say, a couple weeks after they end their service, they would still be eligible to apply for this. So who's not qualified? So that would be members from prior grant years. So we are starting with 15-16. So unfortunately, anybody prior to 15-16 would not qualify. Members who have yet to earn 50% of their hours would also not be eligible. And then full-time members, Youth Opportunity Corps mentors, those categories of other members that are enrolled within the scope of our Youth Build AmeriCorps grant, but aren't Youth Build participants, those members would also not be qualified. And the reason for that is that, again, the goal for this is for members who are entering your program for the purpose, or part of the reason is for securing employment. So that wouldn't necessarily qualify to your full-time members or your mentors for folks who have the mentoring grant. And then lastly, I just want to emphasize this because I know it does come up from time to time. There isn't a regulation that allows for members enrolling in school, but not employment. So unfortunately, it does have to be employment. So even if you have a member who you would say is successful, but is leaving the program to go to college, for example, unfortunately they wouldn't qualify unless employment was also a part of it, and that's just the way the regulations are written. So having gone over all of that, I'm going to pause for a second and see if there are any questions. So I did see a question come here: would a work-study program in college count as employment? So I'm actually going to put that on hold for a second because we're actually going to talk about what counts as employment in just a second. So if we are defining employment, what exactly is employment? So for this, we're going to be using the CNCS definition, which is a bit different than the Department of Labor definition that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, and it's a bit looser. So the CNCF definition is securing employment refers to regular paid employment serving within the military, National Guard within the past week. So it basically, there's only a 1-week window where they need to be employed, and the only requirements are that it is regular and that it is paid. So the question about a work-study program in college, if it is regular and then paid and it was within the last week, then yes, it would qualify as employment under this definition. And then to reiterate, the time span for that would be within 30 days. So you can see there's definitely a lot more flexibility here than is what would normally be in DOL. And another thing that I want to point out is that there's no retention requirement for CNCS definition of employment. So there's no follow-up to check to see if members are still employed after a certain period of time. It's really just that one moment after they're exited, within 30 days of their exit, can you prove that they've been have regular paid employment within the past week. So to kind of get at this, we're going to do a quick quiz to see if that makes sense to you all and kind of talk through some of the different points. So the question is kind of what qualifies as employment under the CNCS definition. So check all that apply. So a lot of people agreed around the part-time job at McDonald's. People are down on the Captain of the Enterprise. That's a great job. Jean-Luc Picard, Captain Kirk, a lot of great names there. We'll go ahead and skip over to the answers. So the first one, AmeriCorps NCCC, no, unfortunately, service terms are not considered employment placement for CNCS. So they're really looking to transition members from their service experience to an employment experience. So that's why those are not counted. Part-time jobs is a McDonald's. I think most of y'all have this down. Yes. So even though it's a part-time and potentially low-paying job, it would qualify as employment under this. I think it is a question for the program whether you would want to exit a member for that, but depending on where the member is at, that could be a successful placement. Union apprenticeship, so that depends a little bit. So assuming that they are getting paid and it is regular payment, then yes, it would qualify. Independent contractor, again, depends a little bit on the circumstances. So If they can demonstrate that they're receiving regular paid employment within the past week, then yes, otherwise no. And then captain of the enterprise, which most of you all didn't have in there. But no, the captain of the enterprise would actually not be considered an employment position because the United Federation of Planets does not use money. So they would not be paid. So now that we've kind of gone over that, so the process for participating in this initiative is we want everybody to submit a waiver request form. So basically we just want to know who in the network is going to be taking advantage of this. And we want you all to take some time to kind of think through what the process would look like at your site. So there are a couple narrative questions that get at sort of when you would use this for members. And then we'll also ask you to lay out what documentation you would use to verify employment for the members. So after you submit the waiver to your portfolio manager, we'll go ahead and let you know if it's approved or have any additional questions. And then as you come up with circumstances where members would need to be exited or you would like to exit members for employment, we're going to ask you to send over their exit documentation before you exit them from eGrants. So you'll send that to your portfolio manager. We'll review it, let you know if there are any issues, and give you the green light to exit them from eGrants. And we're going to do this for the first few, and then afterwards what we'll ask you to do is notify us when you're exiting a member for employment, but we won't always ask for the documentation. So the first few times you do it, we'll ask for the documentation, but afterwards we'll just ask you to notify us when you're exiting a member for employment. So what goes into this exit documentation? So first, we created a lovely form, the exit for employment form, which is very similar, if you're familiar with it, to the personal and compelling circumstances exit form. And that, again, will also be shared after this webinar. So we'll ask you to fill that out. You're also going to need some sort of verification of their employment. Pay stub is usually the most common one, but it could be an acceptance letter from an employer. There are a number of different ways to document employment, but you have to have sort of that external documentation of employment. We're also going to ask you to submit their member hour logs to your portfolio manager so we can review those to verify that the member has completed 50% of their hours. And also we want to check on their 20% training limit. So one of the things that you can get into trouble with early exits is that they can be over their training hours if you're not careful about how you're managing those. And then lastly, we're going to want an end-of-term evaluation. So that's to demonstrate that the member was successful within your program. So here's just an example of what that exit document looks like. And we'll pause a little bit for questions. So Matt, was there anything that you wanted to bring to the larger group?
Somebody asked, if a member exits for employment, are they eligible to serve another AmeriCorps term at a later date? David, any thoughts on that?
Sure. So the answer is yes. So it wouldn't affect their eligibility to serve another term. So you can serve up to 4 state and national terms, so it would count as one of their terms for eligibility. The other place it affects a member is you can only earn up the value of 2 full education awards, so as if you were serving as a full-time member. So it would be counted towards that as well. So it could affect their Ed Award limit, and it also counts as a service term, but they would be eligible to serve another AmeriCorps term.
Great. And then another program asked, what about employment through a temp agency? So I defer to the definition of employment by CNCS, which David pointed out was regular, paid, depending on the employment. Those are the criteria that you would need to adhere to. Any additional thoughts about that, David?
One point that I probably didn't emphasize enough is this idea that behind exiting for employment, the idea is that they're not able to complete your program because they're going to this employment opportunity. So, you know, for something like a temp agency, it could be that they could still participate in the program as well as have that position with the temp agency. So the goal behind it is really you're exiting this member because they found an employment opportunity that's going to set them up for success. So I think there is sort of the CNCF definition, which is very loose and has a lot of eligibility, but I do want to emphasize that we want you all to think about sort of which circumstances would this really be appropriate for your members. So again, I wanted to overview exiting for personal and compelling circumstances. So this is another way that members can be exited for partial awards. So this isn't new. It's been part of the rules for a while now, but I did want to go over it again. So similar to exiting for employment, members would receive a partial award based on their service. And unlike the exit for employment, members only need to complete 15% of their service term as opposed to 50%. And so when you would use this is when members are facing a circumstance that would prevent them from completing their service term. So, it could be an illness, it could be a life circumstance. There are a lot of different things that would qualify under this, but the key is that they're experiencing something generally outside of their control that is preventing them from completing their service term, and you'd be able to exit them with a partial award. So, and unlike the exit for employment, there's also an option to suspend members for personal and compelling circumstances. So if you feel like they would be able to complete their service term at a later date, you can suspend them and have them come back to the program. So some other things about exiting for personal and compelling circumstances. So we do want you to notify your portfolio manager when you're exiting a member. So this is something that we haven't emphasized a lot in the past couple of years, but it's always been our policy. So we just want to reiterate it for this year, is that when you are exiting a member for personal and compelling circumstances, please reach out to your portfolio manager. And depending on the circumstances, we may ask to review the documentation before you exit the member. But really, we just want to make sure that we know whenever you're exiting a member for personal and compelling circumstances. There's also a form for that to make sure that you fill out all the information you need, and it's for both the member and the program to make sure they're aware of what's happening. And then providing documentation of the circumstances, and generally speaking, third-party information is preferred. Documenting these personal circumstances and exit for employment is incredibly important, so we want to make sure that all the programs are doing it correct. And oftentimes, sort of what defines whether you can exit somebody for personal and compelling is whether you can provide the backup documentation for the circumstance or not. So it's very important that we get that right. And then lastly, the member also needs to complete their exit evaluation with the program. There may be circumstances that come out of the blue where this may not be possible, so just consult with your portfolio manager around that and sort of how to document and adjust for that. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next quiz. So what counts as personal and compelling circumstances? So we have enrolling in school, pregnancy, getting a job to take care of your sick mother, your family relocates, you have housing insecurity, or you are assimilated by the Borg. Great. All right, so we got some responses coming in. So yeah, I think the majority of people were on point with their responses. We'll go ahead and skip over to the answers. So first, enrolling in school. So we covered this a little bit earlier. So it doesn't count under employment. It also wouldn't count under personal and compelling circumstances. So enrolling in school, college, university, or either going back to high school, unfortunately, that would not count as a personal and compelling circumstance where a member could get the ED award. Pregnancy is. So if you do have a situation where one of your participants becomes pregnant, they can be suspended. They could also be exited with a partial award. Getting a job to take care of your sick mom, yes, that is definitely a personal and compelling circumstance. So depending on the circumstances, you may actually also potentially qualify for exiting for employment. So that's a situation that might go either way, depending on what the situation is. So family relocates. So very clear for if they are a minor, it's very clear that that is a personal and compelling circumstance. If they are not a minor, then it would depend a little bit on what the situation is, and it's also sort of what can you document from this situation. So can you get a letter from the family that outlines what's going on? So again, sort of, unfortunately, there are times where a circumstance may qualify, but you're not able to get the documentation to back it up. Same thing with housing insecurity. That would also qualify as a personal and compelling circumstance. where a member is unable to participate in the program because their housing situation has deteriorated. So that would also be a situation if you could get it documented. And then lastly, assimilated by the board. So yes, if you're adding your biological and technological distinctiveness to the Borg, it would be unreasonable for you to finish your service term. So the next piece, just reviewing the difference between exiting for employment and personal and compelling. So again, exit for employment is for 50% completion. It's for youth build program participants only. And then on the reverse side, for exiting for personal and compelling circumstances, it only requires 15% of the service term to be completed. And I didn't emphasize this earlier, but I guess to point out, it's for any Youth Build AmeriCorps members. So exiting for personal and compelling circumstances would include your full-time members, your mentors, other members outside of just your Youth Build participants. So that's something to keep in mind as they experience personal and compelling circumstances. So you wouldn't be able to exit them for employment, but you could potentially, if they qualify, exit them for personal and compelling circumstances. And then both the exit for employment and personal and compelling circumstances the members will receive a partial prorated education award, and then we have to make sure that we're providing appropriate documentation of the circumstance or the employment. So just to summarize and reiterate a few points, we're excited about this opportunity to reward successful participants. I think when we first talked about this, people would definitely tell me stories about members who had been in their program and had really been successful, and they had to leave to get in. They just had a great opportunity to take a job, and so they left before they earned their Ed Award. So I'm really excited we're able to do that this year and get those young people their Ed Awards. And I'm also excited to see how this will affect our overall Ed Award numbers, because I know there are a lot of young people out there that could benefit from this. And just some other things to keep in mind. Anytime you're going to do an exit for a partial award, reach out to your portfolio manager. So for exit for employment, we're definitely going to be reviewing the first few and all the documentation. And then for personal and compelling circumstances, we still want to know sort of when you're going to be exiting a member in those situations. And then documentation is critical to make sure that we're reducing risk within the network, and to make sure that these are appropriately documented and that there are no issues. Because I will say, as somebody who reviews member files, the first thing you look for is anomalies. So anything that stands out that could be outside of the normal process, and partial exits are definitely one of them. So as an auditor, when you look at something, it's definitely going to be something that folks focus on. So we've got to make sure we do it right. So with that, that was all that I had for the webinar today. So thank you all for joining us, and look forward to hearing from you all soon.